Hi, good evening everybody, and welcome to the daily Rambam Shiur number 88, the rules of restriction, intimate relation, Issurei Biah, from the 3rd until the 8th chapter. Today we are marking the beginning of the month of Av, which is considered to be a time period where happiness is being reduced from the typical intensity that we are accustomed to throughout the entire year. Mishenichnas Ov memating besimcho. From the moment that Ov comes in, there is a reduction, diminishing in happiness. The highlight of the month of Av is the Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, where we are gathering in the shul, sitting on the floor and reading Megillas Eicho. In Megillas Eicho, there is a pasuk that is very much has a connection with today's Rambam topic. And the passage of this particular pasuk sounds like this: Chet chot o Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim have sinned, committed a sin. Al kain, and therefore hoiso turns out to be lenido beinehem. The word nido in the context of our Halacha is a reference to a woman that she is in her menstrual cycle, and at that time it is forbidden to have the ongoing intimate relationship and other rules of halakha distance that is associated with it as well. The reason why Yerushalayim is being compared to a nido, because as we have learned, there are different types of incests. There is some type of incest relations that they are permanent. For example, for a person to marry his sister, his mother, his aunt, his daughter, his granddaughter, they are permanent, forbidden relation. However, when it comes to a nido, by definition, is a temporary. And in fact, our Chazal are stating that one of the reasons why the Torah introduced the prohibition for the nido is in order for intensify the desire and the attraction that the couple will have amongst themselves. Because any type of a pleasure, we know that ta'inug tmimi, a continuous, uninterrupted pleasure, eino ta'anug, is not a real pleasure, because after any type of pleasure, when a person gets used to and it becomes repetitive and very routine, he loses the excitement. At the moment that there is peaks and valleys, intensity, ups and downs, then the dynamics of the attraction can be kept alive. And in fact, in the Talmud, though that the entire mitzvah of this staying in a distant while she is going through the menstrual cycle, it belongs to the category of those commandments that they are considered to be chukim. Chukim are those areas where there is not much logic, yet there throughout the generations, different commentators were providing different reasons for it, as we will going to go through the shiur via some of them. However, at the first chapter of our daily Rambam shiur of today, the topic is still about permanent type of incest relationship. For example, we know that any woman who is in a state and defined as a married woman, so relationship with her generally are very severe to such an extent that if the act was done by witnesses and with warning, so the punishment will be chenek. Chenek is one of the executions that Beis Din are executing someone with suffocation. There is an entire process with a rope and so on. However, there are many exceptions. Some of the exceptions are if the husband was a minor. If the husband was a minor, so therefore the kiddushin are not biblically binding, and for that reason anyone who had a relationship with a wife of a minor, though it is forbidden, but he will be exempt from capital punishment. Another example, if the girl happens to be a minor and yet her father was not getting the kiddushin for her. If the father was getting the kiddushin, the engagement funds for her, so then it is a fully binding kiddushin and the person will be subject to the punishment of chenek. However, if she is a minor who got married or independently or via her brother or her mother, so in such a case, if someone will have relationship with her while she is married, he will be exempt. And further than this, she will still be permitted to go back to her husband, and even he is a Kohen, because typically a Kohen that his wife was having forbidden relationship while she was married, even though it was done by force, it is still forbidden to continue to live with her. Yet, if the girl happens to be minor and the marriage was done independently, not via her father, so then the person will be exempt from any punishment. There is also another type of exception, but to the other way, talking about Kohanim. If a daughter of a Kohen, she was married and she was having an affair, so the punishment for her will be a fire, burning. Obviously, it's not done with a typical concept of putting her into the fire, but the way it is being done by putting a hot melted metal into her throat, and that's how the execution is being done. In a case of a girl that she's above 12 years old, which is called a nairo, and she is in the stage of engagement, which is called nairo aruso, and she is still virgin, and yet she was having an affair between her engagement and her marriage, so generally the punishment then will be by skilo. Skilo, it's called stoning. But however, again, stoning is the second stage. Initially, any execution of the punishment of skilo, initially it's being done by throwing the criminal out of a building that is 2 stories high, and if the person was not expiring at that way, so then there is a actual stoning with stones. So again, if she was a na'aro, someone between the age of 12 and 12 and a half, and she was an aruso, and it was done beveis oviho while she was or at the house of her father or at the house of her future father-in-law, so then the punishment will be by stoning. The location of the stoning will vary. Sometimes it will be done on the gates of the city of her father. Sometimes it will be done in the gates of the city where she committed the crime, and in sometimes it will be done at the entry of the Beis Din. Then that's where the execution will be done in case that she is a Na'ira Me'oroso. So if we're going to summarize, any type of relationship with a married woman outside her marriage, called extramarital affair of a married woman, can be resulted or by the execution of chenek, which is suffocation, or the execution of sreifo, burning, but in this case putting a hot melted metal into her mouth, which will be reserved to a bas kohen, or by skilo, which again being reserved only to a specific case of na'aro hame'uroso. Na'aro hame'uroso is a girl between the age of 12 to 12 and a half, subject that she produced two hairs in the intimate area. And there is also a fourth type of a punishment, that this is reserved to a very unique case. There is type of a lady, she is called shifcho charufo. Shifcho charufo, every morning in our prayers, right before we are starting hoidu, and we are reciting the different offerings which were brought in the temple, both publicly for the entire collective Jewish people, or it was done for private specific crimes a person committed unknowingly, subconsciously. So one of the items that we recite every day is Oshom Shifcho Charufo. Shifcho, Oshom is a type of an offering. Shifcho is a female servant. Charufo, that she is in a stage that half of her is considered to be servant, and the other half, she is free. Possibility, if she happened to belong to two partners and one of them released her, so 50% of her is a free, full-fledged Jew, and the other half, she is considered to be a shifcho. A shifcho is a mate, and therefore, and on top of it, she is engaged to a Eved Ivri, to a Jewish slave. In such a case, if someone committed a extramarital affair with her, if it was done on her part knowingly, and she was not a virgin at that time, and on top of it, she was fully, it says she's a shifcho, she happens to have all the criteria that define her as a shifcho charufo, then the punishment for her would be lashes, and the punishment for him, regardless whether he did it deliberately or he did it beshoigeg, without knowing or without being fully aware, will be a offering which is called Osham Shifcho Charufo, where he needs to bring a ram, ail, to the Beis Hamikdash, and the entire procedure is being recited in Chumash Vayikro. So this is a fourth type of forbidden relationship with different consequences. Now, as we said before, about the second chapter of the Rambam of today deals with all the issues of Nida. We have explained before that a Nida, contrary to other forbidden incest relation, just by definition it happens to be a temporary restriction, since it is based and it is linked to the cycle, to the menstrual cycle of the lady. Now, though, as I've mentioned before, that this belongs to category of the Torah, which is called Chukim, but large attention was given both in the Kabbalah, in Hasidut, to explain and to bring this idea closer to our heart, to our mind, because obviously, especially we're living in a world that's so much challenging this type of phenomena. So the more we are equipped, the more we are inspired with explanations, with reasoning, which will obviously, we gotta be committed to the rules of the Torah, regardless whether we have a explanation or not. But it is always, when you do have an explanation, it is more attainable and more possible to deal with different challenges. So first of all, we'll give a little bit of history. Chazal are stating that this idea of Nida is one of the curses that Chava, our mother Eve, was cursed after the committing the crime, the sin of tasting from the tree of knowledge. And basically this blood is expressing the evil that came to the world as a result from that sin, which is the roots of the entire evil that exists in the world, where the klipot, where those shells, where the foreign forces are able to gain their energy. And Chazal are saying when the snake was getting close to Chava, he contaminated her with the poison, and not necessarily with physical poison, but obviously spiritual poison. Because you see, there is two types of blood. On one hand, there is type of blood where the person is getting his life and vivid energy from that blood. And then there is a blood that basically being discharged from a person, and it is considered to be the residues or waste that going outside. So there is a blood that continuously being recycled in our system, which is a positive, and the blood of the Nido, given the fact that it comes, the original source of it is from that evil that the original snake infected Chava with. So since she was the cause of the sin and the cause of the consequences, in her hands and under her responsibility and the mitzvah, the fulfillment, the tikkun, the to fix, to rectify and bring back the issue to its original state, that is also upon her. There is also a very interesting concept. We know that Bichlal, generally the attributes, the godly attributes, are being divided into chasodim, into what we call the side of chesed, and then there is the element of gvurot, dinim, severities. So typically the male represents chasodim, and the female represents the idea of gvurot. So for that reason, we know that typically the gvurot, the severities, they come in the form of 5. There is 5 gvurot, represents the idea of also from the, when the hashpa'ah, when the flow is being contracted via the fingers, so there is the idea of 5. And there is also 5 types of blood which will determine whether the Isha, whether the lady is indeed defined as a nido or not. Later on, we will see in the Rambam that though we are generally referring to the monthly cycle as what we called Nida. However, there is what is called later on, especially tomorrow, but now I just in a short form introduced. There is biblically the life of a lady is being from the moment that she is born. Biblically, it's being divided into a cycle of 7-11, which means when sometimes when she sees the blood and she starts to menstruate, halachically it will be defined as nido, and sometimes she will be defined as zovo. There are different consequences. Nido, biblically, when a lady have seen blood, so whether she saw it for 1 minute, whether she saw it for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, regardless, or 7 days, at the end of these 7 days, she goes at night to the mikvah, and biblically, she's permitted to have relation with her husband. This is the definition of Nida. Then, after those 7 days, since biblically she is not Nida anymore, whatever blood she will see after those 7 days, in the upcoming 11 days, it will be considered to be the blood of Zava. Zava is a different definition, although it can be the same blood physically, but halachically, it is a different definition. And at that time, she will be, even if she saw it biblically 1 day or 2 days, she can go to the mikveh and will be permitted to her husband. However, if she saw it more than 2 days, she saw it 3 days, then she needs to count 7 nekim, 7 days without seeing any blood, and only then she will be permitted to her husband. So this is the rules biblically. So again, the first, from the moment a girl is being born, in theory, whatever blood she will be able to see, it will be the blood of Nida. After 7 days, the upcoming 11 days, it will be the blood of Zovo. And so on, the rest of her life, biblically. Later on, we're going to see when it comes to halacha, it's totally different. However, the reason in spirituality, there is 2 types of klipot. There is 2 types of waste. There is 2 types, I would say, negative forces. There are those negative forces who came into the world as part of creation, as part of the system. And then there is negativity that was introduced to the world by the action that human beings have contributed to this negativity. So while the dam nido represents so-called natural, systematic type of negative forces that was part of the creation, since the intensifying of evil that came as a result of human contribution to this mess, so therefore the requirement is also to purify for 7 days. By a nido, you don't need to purify for 7 days. By a nido, theoretically, if she have seen all the 7 days that fit to be defined as days of nido, and she goes to the mikveh, she is immediately permitted to her husband. However, when it comes to Zivo, it is necessary to count 7 clean days. Why is it necessary to count 7 clean days? Because any type of a intensified evil that a person got involved, in order to rectify it, he must have all 7 attributes, all 7 internal forces of himself to go and work and clean it up and rectify this issue.
So essentially, for the first 7 days, and then for the next 17 days, a total of 18.
Correct.
It is
so
spiritually better to.
So here, when it comes to Halacha, it will be totally different. I'm just explaining how it is according to the Kabbalah, what represents. Later on, we will see something very interesting. Right now, it is Rosh Chodesh. And in Rosh Chodesh, we will pray tomorrow. In our prayers, we will mention the offerings that used to be brought in the temple of the day of Rosh Chodesh. And we will see that the total offerings was 11. Why 11? 11 are being coincide with those 11 days that representing those days that they are linked to the days of Zivo. Since in the idea of Rosh Chodesh, we are marking the atonement not only of the collective nation, but the collective creation and the creator as well. While we were covering the rules of Kiddush HaChodesh, we have mentioned that this issue of the reduction of the light of the moon and the continuous effort to bring back the mass to the original state to such an extent that even God Almighty says, bring for me each and every Rosh Chodesh an atonement, and part of those offerings which are being brought in Rosh Chodesh is an atonement for God Almighty Himself. For that reason, we see something very interesting. The relationship between the sun and the moon are reflecting the relationship halachically between a husband and his wife. And we see that in the sun and the moon, half of the month, the moon is standing in the most distant position possible from the sun, and only at that time she happens to shine the fullest. And the other half of the moon, she is staying the closest to the sun. So the relationship between the sun and the moon represents in the Kabbalic term the relationship between Sfiras HaMalchus, the attribute of Malchut, together with the attribute of Zah. While sun represents the sun, the light of the sun represents the idea of Zah, and the moon represents the Malchus. And we see that half of the month, the relationship between the sun and the moon are such that she is the furthest away from the sun, and in the second half of the month she is the closest or getting very close to the sun, which again represents and gives an idea about the rules and about this halachos and the rule that referring half of the month the relationship in a close form and half of the month are not in a close form. It is also very important to note that throughout the entire halachos, especially when it comes to the idea of Nida, the reference that she is in a state of tum'o or tahor. When she is in a state, in a permitting state, she is tahor. And tum'ah is the idea of ritual contamination. The reason why those terms and not the terms of mutar or asur, permitted or forbidden, are being used, because a state of a woman that she is nido or zovo have, in addition to the implication that affects their intimate relationship, there is other implications as well. Regarding entry to the jurisdiction of the temple, when a lady is in a state of nido or zovo or yoledes, or she gave birth, it is forbidden for her not to enter to the jurisdiction of the temple and not to come in contact with a holy object, whether it will be meat from the korbanos, from the offerings, or whether it can be trumo or ma'aser sheni or any type of holy object. It is forbidden for her to come in touch, and there is consequences. So for that reason, throughout the halachos, the term tum'o v'taharo is being used. Now, we mentioned before, when a lady gives birth, so though the blood is flowing, so while the child she gave birth is a male, so the first 7 days she will be in a state of tum'o, and she will be forbidden both to her husband and to have any contact with holy objects. For after the 7 days, for the next 33 days, though the blood is flowing, nevertheless, biblically, midoiraiso, she will be permitted to have relationship with her husband and enter to the temple. If she gave birth to a female, so then for the first 2 weeks she will be restricted, but the next 66 days she will be allowed again to have contact with her husband and enter to the temple, biblically only, though that she is still flowing blood. This is a open text in Parshas Tazria in Chumash Vayikro that we're reading every day. Now, generally, some women, they have a regular cycle. Some people don't. There are differences. A woman who have a regular cycle, so she is under the presumption that she is tohir. That particular day of the month that she have created a very defined trend and pattern that she sees in that particular day, the day can be divided into what we call the season, oino. From sunrise to sunset, it's called one type of oino, and from sunset throughout the entire night until sunrise in the morning is another oino. So let's say a woman created a pattern to see in a certain day of the month 6 o'clock a.m. and assuming that it's after sunrise. So throughout until this pattern will be broken, each and every day of that month, she won't be able to have contact with her husband at that particular oino until the oino passed away, and then if there is blood, fine, so she's an nido. If not, she can continue on to have a relation, no problem. It is also a very interesting discussion of a lady who tells to her husband that I am not clean, in the sense that I'm not pure. And later on, she reversed and she said to her husband, I was joking, I'm fine. Would I believe her or not? So the only way to believe her, if she gave a good reason to explain why she was actually providing a false statement initially. If her explaining for providing a false statement initially is satisfactory, then I would believe her. Otherwise, not. The Rambam gives an example what will be a satisfactory explanation for the initial false statement. For example, he says, I understood that you had a desire for me, and yet my father and my friends were there, and I was just embarrassed to tell you that it's okay. So for that reason I have lied. So this is a legitimate explanation, a satisfactory explanation that will explain the reverse of her statement. The Rambam deals also with a situation, it's a very rare situation of a lady that happens to be one time after the second, 3 times in a row, she happens to see blood as a result from having intimate relationship. While they having the relationship, then she sees blood, she becomes a Nida. If it happens 3 times, one after the other, the person needs to divorce her. If it happened with 3 husbands, one after the other, then she won't be able to marry unless she fixes the problem. It's a very rare case, but it's important to know about it. At the final chapter of today, the Rambam states a very clear distinction about which type of blood will be considered a qualified blood that will turn her into a status of a Nida or a Zova. Not every blood that comes out from the reproductive organ will be considered a Tomei, because the only blood that will be a Tomei if it comes indeed from the uterus. If it doesn't come directly from the uterus, it can be a result of a womb or any others. So therefore, there is 5 types of blood which will define whether she is indeed Tomei or not. And the final subject that the Rambam deals, another example where a blood, not necessarily though it appears to be red, it's not an item that will make her Tomei. Let's say if she's a virgin, so just by the fact of losing her virginity, blood will be there. So he makes a general distinction whether she was a minor, whether she was after the age of 12, or whether she is older. Based upon the age, that's how prolonged will be the time that I will give her to assign the blood, or to link any blood that she will see as a blood that is resulted from the loss of virginity. For example, a minor, as long until the point that the womb is being healed, it will be considered not qualified blood, which means a blood that is not Adam Nido. If she's older, Nairo, I will give 4 days. In a typical case, I will give only 1 night, and sometimes only the first intercourse will be considered a dam besulim, and later on, whatever blood she will see, it will be a dam nido. So that's basically, on a nutshell, the rules of both of the incest rules that pertaining both to Eishes Ish and also to the idea of Nido, Yoledes, Zovo, and so on. I want to wish everybody a Chodesh Tov, a good Chodesh. May God Almighty will turn the days from Yogoin Va'anocho to Sosoin and Simcho, and Moyadim and Yomim Tovim. Thank you.
השיעור היה קצת קצר, לא?